Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to PopulistPodcast. I'm Chase.
I'm Charles.
And today we're joined by special guest Mike LiPetri, who is running for New York's 2nd Congressional District. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, let's start with the basics. Where'd you come from? Why are you running? All that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm running in the South Shore of Long Island, the 2nd Congressional District, to succeed Pete King, who just recently announced his retirement late last year. Born and raised on Long Island, my mother's a nurse. My dad worked for a utility company for virtually his entire career. So I grew up seeing what it meant to work hard to get rewarded. I don't come from a family of political background or wealth. For me, it was straight up hard work and effort to get to where I am today as a New York State Assemblyman. Before that, I was an attorney. I defended police, firefighters, and correctional officers, New York State Law Department. I then went over to private practice, and then I had an opportunity to go up against a left-wing extremist, someone who was a Bernie Sanders delegate back in 2016, who was identifying with a lot of these socialist ideologies that are just way too extreme and don't work for the average, everyday, law-abiding American. For me, it was a matter of standing up for common sense and standing up for people who just want to work hard and provide for their families and make a good living and make sure they live in a time that's safe, it's comfortable, and to be quite frank, it's something where they don't have to worry about what gangs are in their district or worry about government taking more money from them the harder they work. So when I had this opportunity to run up against this Democrat incumbent to take the state assembly seat, for me, it was a matter of showing the people who I am, what I'm about, and making sure that they knew that I was going to stand up for what's right for them.
Well, just recently, your fellow party members decided to endorse Andrew Garbarino. So how does this affect your campaign moving forward?
Really doesn't affect it as much because for me, people see what I've done. I think that's what it comes down to is what have you done? And I'm the only candidate in this race that could say, look what I've accomplished. I've stood up for our veterans. I stood up for our law enforcement. I stand with our union brothers and sisters. And I've focused on providing proactive solutions to addressing our environment, specifically our water quality here over on Long Island and throughout New York State.
All right. Well, as you've said before, and as you've been saying your entire campaign, you're a staunch supporter of law enforcement. However, with the current issue of police brutality and how it disproportionately affects people of color, would you support officers having to wear body cameras at all times to ensure accountability?
I would be open to a dialogue on that issue without a doubt. I mean, what I'm seeing more and more, to be honest with you, is a lot of those individuals who allege the police brutality, the body cameras are actually providing for the benefit of the police officers, showing that they actually weren't doing anything outside of using reasonable force. I mean, at the end of the day, a police officer needs to effectuate an arrest, and they have to use reasonable force in order to do so. So what it comes down to is whether or not the officer provided excessive force. And that's something that is rarely shown in today's day and age on a general level. So you have a lot of extremists on the Democrat side, really not even Democrats, these are socialists now, that want to cherry pick one or two specific incidents and then try to cast a broad brush that's saying all police are like that, which is just palpably untrue. And for me, it's about standing up for law enforcement, showing that these guys are ones providing for our safety. And they need to effectuate arrests. They need to do their jobs and make sure that we live in a safe community and a safe society. But I'm open to a dialogue on this issue, and I'd be amenable to seeing what people say who are pushing for body cameras on the left when really it's actually acquitting more and more officers because it's showing proof that they did what was in the realm of their duties.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to a different issue. We're going to get onto the topic of healthcare. That's a big issue, left and right these days. So, according to a study conducted at Harvard Medical School and Cambridge Health Alliance, 32,000 to 45,000 Americans die annually due to a lack of healthcare. So, what would you do in Congress to combat not only this, but also the rising prescription drug prices in this country?
Sure. Healthcare is a big issue. I mean, there needs to be a large focus, frankly, on a macro level on obesity and mental health and addiction. Those are the crux of a lot of large costs that are associated with healthcare, whether it be pushing for more exercise, dieting, incentivizing, better health, better maintaining health for your own self, focusing on helping coping with addiction by providing alternative treatment for individuals that are either using from prescription drugs or from illicit drugs. But on top of it, it's also focusing on the healthcare industry as a whole. Now, what we have here is not healthcare insurance. See, it's you look at insurance, and insurance is meant to be as a backup for in cases of or emergency. So when you use insurance, for example, in motor vehicle insurance, you still pay for your tires, your oil change, your regular maintenance. But when there's a collision where your car is extremely damaged, that's where the insurance is triggered in those circumstances. Healthcare, as it operates now, is more of a prepaid healthcare system where you're paying these premiums, and only when you go, it's you have to pay a certain copay, but yet you don't really know the background, the behind the scenes of how much anything is really costing. It's ironic because in the healthcare industry, that's really the only main industry where you don't really know the costs are associated. If I ask anybody in the street today, how much is it for an X-ray? I don't know. People don't know that. So I think our healthcare system needs to change and needs to focus on becoming more 21st century in the sense of where healthcare is now brought down to a level where consumers can purchase it as if it was on a regular marketplace, and then still have a hybrid approach where it has an insurance component. So should you need assistance with uh, surgeries or emergency situations that may arise, you still get that quality of care and that you're still protected in those circumstances. So there needs to be a change in the system where it's focused on a hybrid approach where you still have maintenance at regular daily maintenance that you know the cost associated with that you can pay for, and at the same time you're protected for any emergency circumstance that may occur where you do need that health care on the fly.
When you say that you want to move to 21st century healthcare and the rest of the developed world, with the exception of a few Balkan states and Belarus, all of these countries have universal healthcare. So would you say that universal coverage is a modern take, or do you think that they're more behind the times than we are?
No, I think it's not a matter of universality per se, but it needs to be more on focusing on technological advancements that are at our disposal, where you can get treatments. Many doctors nowadays, you don't need to step into the office. You could have it where you're simply diagnosed via your phone, where you could have it just simply an examination. You could have treatment done without having to go through the hoops of going to the office, then meeting with a certain PCP, then going to an expert, then going to a specific healthcare provider. It needs to be more of an open market where a patient can choose which doctor they want to go to, how they can be prescribed, how they can receive treatment, how they can receive a diagnosis. All that can be streamlined through using these technological advancements online, through your phone, and through other applications.
Okay, and just like a last follow up on that, would you then support making health insurance more along the lines of run for nonprofit, like how it used to be run?
What do you mean? Can you elaborate on that specifically?
So just like taking the profit motive away a bit.
Well, I think there still needs to be competition in the market because that's what I mean by making it where the consumer, the patient, knows how much things will cost, and by bringing transparency to the health insurance market and healthcare industry allows the patient to choose which quality providers they want based on the cost associated with the such providers. So I think that there still needs to be a market component involved, but you need to cast sunshine on the industry as a whole rather than simply having people go in and yet not really have a clue what anything costs. Right now, as I said, people just go in, they pay their copay, and they just say, "Oh, the insurance industry will figure it out with the provider or the doctor or healthcare practitioner." And for me, I think that's a central issue. Is you're not having the patient really understand and be aware of what anything is costing because there really aren't any hard costs associated with the services, and that's a market that's not existent in any primary way anywhere else.
Well, we're going to move on. And with rampant recidivism rates and prisons overflowing with nonviolent offenders, what steps should be taken to reform the criminal justice system?
Well, I think first off, it's a matter of identifying what is nonviolent. Because in New York State right now, they classify second degree manslaughter, criminally negligent homicide, burglary, robbery, riot one as all as nonviolent. So they classify in New York State uh, those dealers, drug dealers who have enough heroin and opioids to kill all of Long Island as nonviolent. So that is a question of, I think you have to first identify and define what you think nonviolent is, and then go from there in which how we actually actively address such problems.
Okay, so then after you define what nonviolent is, let's just take someone who uses marijuana for an example. What would you do from there?
Well, I think that's where the court systems would be allowed to have their judicial discretion to see what the person's rap sheet was, how many times they've offended. Is this isolated offense? Is it just simply are they getting arrested for marijuana? How much marijuana? I think that's the problem, is that today's politics, they don't like to address on a case by case basis and actually see who the person is that's getting arrested, what they've done, where they're coming from, what's the circumstances behind the scenes. And the criminal justice system, it's much more than just black and white. I mean, in law, there's always that gray area where you have to really identify each case, and that's where I think it's more important that we allow our courts to do their job to address these problems, because more often than not, a person isn't simply just arrested for marijuana. There's something more associated with that, where there might be other drugs, much harder drugs. There could be other crimes associated or charges associated, such as maybe assault or battery or perhaps a burglary. So a trespass, it needs to be more than just and that's where there needs to be discussion when you point to these issues. We have to really dig deeper than just have a cursory overview of problems.
So when you talk about taking things on a case-by-case basis, would you look at ending minimum sentencing and things that try to provide a blanket solution to a problem?
Well, I think that's always a good debate to have, or a good dialogue to have about minimum sentencing. I find minimum sentencing as a great deterrence method. I mean, that's what you also have to look at the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system is about deterrence too. And when people understand that no matter what the cases may be, once you're found guilty of such crimes, you will be incarcerated for X period of time for said crimes. That acts as a deterrence to society, and that does, in fact, prove to work. But it's always okay to have a dialogue to see where specifically the crimes, I should say, uh, or people would consider extreme, or people would consider the punishment outweighs the crime. But at the end of the day, you also have to remember the law-abiding American, right? I mean, there are plenty of people that across this country that go day in and day out, live their lives according to the law. And what kind of message are you sending when you're saying, oh, well, the law abiding citizen is, let's just say, not seeing the benefits to them following the law because these other criminals are out there that were judged, that were found guilty, and now we're still being lenient on them where they can still repeat offend? It's a dialogue that needs to happen, and it's discussion that people should be more open to rather than simply shutting down differing views.
All right. Well, we're going to move on next to a very real threat that comes up a lot in debates today, and that's climate change. So, with 97% of climate scientists in agreement regarding this threat, what are you going to do to ensure a safe future for all Americans if elected to Congress?
Well, I think that's where you have to balance climate change and the environment with the economy. Like, you can't have anything where it's all in, where you're going extreme and then it shuts down the economy to where you can't compete with other countries. At the end of the day, you have to remember that you're still the United States of America, and you have to do what's best in the interest of your country and your nation and your people to make sure that we as a country flourish. Now, that's not to say that we don't incentivize, but at the same token, while we have many congressmen and congresswomen out touting climate change, everyone is ignoring clean water and our water infrastructure issues and our problems with maintaining clean drinking water throughout this nation, providing adequate funding to upgrade our infrastructure. So back in approximately 1972, I believe, Congress passed the Clean Water Act, which governed water pollution in the United States. It provided approximately 75% of funding to water infrastructure projects with state and local governments, provided the extra 25%. That has completely vanished. And while we have others that are focusing on climate change, which requires other countries to be involved with heavily, including China, India, and other Asian countries, you have right here in our own backyard where the United States can take hold of and really be the primary leader in making sure that our own water quality, water infrastructure is protected, preserved, and kept clean so that future generations, like our children and our grandchildren, can not have to worry about what's going to happen. Is our water going to be polluted? Is it being contaminated by other contaminants? I mean, over in New York State and on Long Island, we have those problems with chemicals intruding in our sole source aquifer, which is the largest aquifer in the entire nation. That's where we draw our own water, our clean drinking water. And if that gets contaminated, we're in trouble. So while others are focusing on issues that may attract voters, I'm focusing on issues right in our own backyard that can make a real difference, that if we bring a proactive attention to, we can treat and maintain. And that's what I was talking about before, about having accomplishments. I spearheaded a statewide water quality task force where I held regional forums identifying these problems across New York State that allows us to create proactive solutions to make sure we preserve and protect our drinking water and then also our wastewater systems so they don't pollute our bays, our rivers, our creeks, and our aquifers.
All right, so a little follow up on that. With climate scientists pointing to all of these things that we need to do, the time frame varies between 10 to 30 years, but they say that we need to reach net zero emissions. So should that be a goal of the United States?
Well, that's a net zero emissions on a global level. Again, this is a threat facing not just America but the entire world, and we understand that. And we have to protect our planet, no doubt about that, and I agree. But we have to do it in a way that incentivizing businesses, individuals, reducing their carbon footprint in a realistic manner that doesn't erase how our economy operates. So it's a matter of working with other countries on a global level, but in a way that's fair, that allows us to still operate and function properly so that we, as a country as a whole, can still remain as the hegemon across this world.
Would you advocate for rejoining the Paris Climate Accords?
I wouldn't say I would want to review that and much deeper. I wouldn't say we just rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. I'd want to have it where I think a new deal needs to be struck, where it's ensuring accountability that every nation across the world is doing their fair share without the United States being overwhelmingly burdened and affected unfairly.
Okay, well, we're going to switch it up. According to Immigration and Customs Enforcement's website, they had 9 people in 2019 reportedly die under their watch, and they had one particular raid in Mississippi where they arrested 600 people. Do you think that ICE, as it's referred to, receives too much scrutiny? Jesus. Do you think ICE receives too much scrutiny or too little scrutiny?
I think ICE is a point of attack for many people to pander to voters. What ICE does is keeps our communities safe. Now, what I can test to in New York State and on Long Island specifically, I rode firsthand, did a ride along with ICE to watch them what they did for administrative and criminal arrests. Now, these are individuals who specifically target people here illegally who've committed crimes, and that's what I can attest to and what I've witnessed firsthand on Long Island is that they targeted people here illegally who committed crimes. These are gangs like MS-13, murderers wanted by Interpol. These are sex predators who did disgusting things to children. Now, say in our communities, if you're here legally or illegally, no matter what, you don't want these types of individuals in our neighborhoods. And if you want to have a safe community, then ICE needs to be able to effectuate their duties and their jobs and continue their role in protecting these states and this country.
So when you say that these people that are committing all these crimes, obviously we don't want them in our communities, but whether they're here legally or illegally, why would we need a separate branch of Homeland Security to take care of people that would generally fall under the normal jurisdiction of law enforcement?
Because ICE is tasked with identifying specifically and targeting these individuals that are or should not be in our country in the first place and should not be terrorizing our communities. So I think by having a police force that is tasked with ridding our community of gangs, murderers, and sex predators, I'm supportive of that, and I think that's what people need to realize is what they do on a day-to-day basis is keep us safe.
Just to follow up on that topic, immigrants that are here illegally in this country, statistics have found that they actually commit crimes at a lower rate than natural born citizens. So when you speak to obviously these rapists, these sex predators, all of these admittedly terrible people, again, I ask, shouldn't that fall under the jurisdiction of normal law enforcement?
Well, I think the specific portions of it is that ICE has the ability and the intelligence to gather and target. That's the point. These are more targeted enforcement, and it's identifying these specific uh, individuals who what's happening unfortunately is that are being released back in our communities because of problems with working with local governments per se, like on Long Island. Many of them will, even though ICE issues a detainer request so that they can arrest them and make sure they're deported and out of this country, unfortunately you have local municipalities that instead allow them to be released back in our communities despite the ICE detainer request, and then now ICE has to go and find it specifically. So our law enforcement doesn't have to do duplicative work on the local level where they can still police on a regular basis our communities and keep us safe. So it's a layered security approach that's necessary ultimately to make sure that these types of criminals that have committed these gang attacks, such as MS-13, or these murderers, or those who committed these sex predator actions, are arrested and ensure that they are deported from this country.
All right. Well, I'm going to move into my final topic, and that's foreign policy. So, with the war in Afghanistan, which has been ongoing for 18 years now, and has seemingly little to show for the large loss of life that's been associated with it on both sides, do you believe it's necessary for the U.S. to continue such world policing as they do in the Middle East?
I think there comes down to you have to have a balanced approach to where we're not getting ourselves involved more than is necessary to ensure that there's stability in surrounding nations in order for the United States market to operate effectively, but also to ensure that no enemies abroad develop without the United States being able to temper it or at least having the intelligence and surveillance to know what is brewing.
So, in Afghanistan in particular, where it's our involvement alone that created the Taliban, do you think that that conflict was necessary to begin with?
I think there's a lot more involved with that, given the fact that of where it stemmed from after the 2001 attacks. But I think it also comes down to from after that you had also the development of ISIS that's occurred, and from there you now have to see what other renegades are forming. I look at it as you still have to have people, or whether it be actual soldiers in Afghanistan versus surveillance there or intelligence there, but there still needs to be an awareness of what's happening, a presence to ensure that it just doesn't dive into chaos, and in which case, how does that affect America and its future? So that's what I mean about having that balanced approach, where it's taking it almost not even a day by day, but year by year basis, where you're seeing what's happening with the economy abroad, what's happening with society abroad. Is there stability? What's happening with the civilization? And I think that's important that the United States still has a presence to make sure that doesn't get out of hand, so that the United States can function appropriately uh, abroad as well.
All right. So my last follow up on the topic, you've spoken to making sure that all Americans are safe, which obviously that's the end goal, no matter what side you're on, what party you're in. Everybody wants to keep America safe. So I ask, do you think that the most recent example of U.S. involvement in the Middle East, the drone strike on General Qasem Soleimani, with even those close to Trump saying that there was no imminent threat, do you believe that that attack was justified?
I do believe that attack was justified. I think this is a man that was a known terrorist. This was somebody who, frankly, woke up every day saying, "How am I going to commit terror acts and kill people?" And for me, it comes down to protecting American lives, and more than one American life that is killed from this man justified for me to go after him and kill him.
All right. Well, that's all the questions we have. If you want to take a minute, say whatever you want to say to the audience.
Yeah, I appreciate Chase and Charles this time to speak to your audience, to talk about having and restoring common sense, understanding that there's going to be a dialogue with both sides to come to a conclusion that betters all of America. I think we're having too much of partisanship, but we need people that are going to stand by Republican principles and values, to stand up for what we believe in, but also understanding that there's the opposite side of democratic values, where you can still have a dialogue with people. Now more than ever, with today's politics, we need to start having a dialogue, restore back to the age of Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill, where you can come to a compromise and a deal that will benefit all of America. But specifically, we have to start focusing on law-abiding Americans, and we have to start espousing facts, not simply pandering to extremists, but focusing on our facts, focusing on data, and focusing on information that's going to benefit all America, to carry us forward in a way that makes it better for the law-abiding citizen. So that's my focus. I come back from a background of hard work and effort, and for me, I want to instill those values, bring it back to a pro-family, pro-community environment where you have strong families, strong communities. Those are the key to economic and societal well-being, and that's ultimately what I look to restore.
All right. That's all we have for you guys today. If you'd like to support Mike's campaign, please visit his website and all of his social medias. They will all be linked down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.